powerless quadrant. It wasn't on the official charts anymore, scrubbed like it had never existed. But deep in the archives, in the echo chambers of corrupted black box data, it whispered. Not in words. Not in code. Something else. Our orders were clear: dock, survey, extract any remaining tech, and leave. What they didn't say, but all of us felt, was that we were expendable. A test run. A probe to measure the silence. Commander Elira Voss led the mission. Hardened by 20 years in the Belt Wars, she didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in protocols, numbers, and the cold mechanics of survival. But as our ship reached the base's decaying docking ring, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Recognition. Or maybe dread. The kind of fear you don't speak aloud because it makes it real. The kind that crawls up your spine when the air's too still. The bay was sealed, no lights, no power. Yet the sensors read ambient heat signatures, faint, pulsing like breath. We suited up and crossed into the abyss, boots clanking against alloy panels that hadn't been touched in decades. The place smelled wrong. Not rot, there was no biomass left, but something dry and electric, like a machine had died mid-thought and never powered down. Lights flickered to life as we passed. Not all, just enough to make us wonder if we were being guided. Watched? The first anomaly came quickly. A hatch to sublevel Theta, locked from the inside with no override access, suddenly hissed open on its own. The station's AI, thought to be long dead, pinged us with a corrupted greeting loop. Welcome back, Director Keln. Protocol 7 in progress. None of us were Keln. There was no record of Protocol 7. Voss frowned and motioned forward. We descended into the sublevels, past collapsed corridors and walls scored by something, not mechanical. Like claws. But too symmetrical, too precise. The deeper we went, the louder it became. Not sound. A pressure in the skull. Like a thought pressing against the inside of your mind, trying to slip in. Our medic, Jane, began murmuring phrases in a language none of us knew. We thought it was a psychotic break until the doors opened themselves for her. And only her. There was no power here. No logic. Just the whisper. Hollow Point hadn't been abandoned. It had transformed. Not broken, but changed into something watching, waiting. For us? For something else? We didn't know yet. We just knew we weren't the first. And we wouldn't be the last. The base was alive. And it had plans. The sublevels weren't built for human passage anymore. Whatever they once were, crew quarters, labs, storage, they had been restructured. Angles didn't conform to Euclidean geometry. Walls looped and doubled back on themselves. Gravity pockets tugged at us from impossible directions. Even the air, thin, recycled, stale, felt dense, like moving through something thick and unseen. And then there were the markings. Not paint, not scratches. Symbols etched into every surface. Not random either. They pulsed faintly, in unison with the hum inside our skulls. We were being pulled inward, not physically but psychically. Hollow Point wasn't guiding us with light or sound. It was thinking us into place. Jane kept walking ahead of us, glassy-eyed and mumbling those alien syllables like a child reciting nursery rhymes in their sleep. When we tried to hold her back, she screamed. Not in pain, but in defiance. You don't hear them, she spat. They're not angry, they're lonely. The phrase chilled us more than any malfunction or hull breach ever had. Lonely? In this hollow, forgotten station in a quadrant devoid of stars? Voss hesitated for the first time. Her fingers lingered on the hilt of her sidearm. Not to draw it, just to remember it was there. A human gesture, a tether to normalcy. But her other hand tapped the control panel, unlocking the bulkhead Jane stood before. It slid open with a hiss like breath escaping a corpse. Beyond was a chamber unlike anything in the station's schematics, a dome of metal and flesh fused together with no clear line between organ and alloy. The walls were pulsing, alive, as if the station had grown a heart and buried it deep below. There, in the center, floated a shape. It wasn't solid. Not quite energy. A shimmering tear in reality, anchored by black tendrils that reached into the ceiling, the floor, the walls. Jane approached it slowly, arms wide like she was welcoming an old friend. This is the mind, she said softly. Not a machine. Not a god. It remembers the first ones. The ones before time. We tried to pull her back, but our feet wouldn't move. Not paralyzed. Bound. Like the floor had made its decision for us. The mind pulsed once, and in that instant, every one of us saw something. Our own deaths, our own births, our thoughts laid bare in a sequence that had no order, no time. I saw Voss as a child, crying over her brother's casket. I saw Jane as a woman, far older than she was, her eyes black and shining. I saw myself, floating in this room, merged with the walls, whispering into future minds. Then it stopped. Jane collapsed. The mind dimmed. But we were changed. None of us spoke on the way back to the upper levels. Hollow Point had peeled us open like fruit. We hadn't discovered an alien relic. We had stepped into a being, one that didn't understand boundaries. A consciousness born from memory, metal, and loneliness. And it had tasted us. The sublevels weren't built for human passage anymore. Whatever they once were, crew quarters, labs, storage, they had been restructured. Angles didn't conform to Euclidean geometry. Walls looped and doubled back on themselves. Gravity pockets tugged at us from impossible directions. Even the air, thin, recycled, stale, felt dense, like moving through something thick and unseen. And then there were the markings. Not paint, not scratches. Symbols, etched into every surface. Not random either. They pulsed faintly, in unison with the hum inside our skulls. We were being pulled inward, not physically but psychically. Hollow Point wasn't guiding us with light or sound. It was thinking us into place. Jane kept walking ahead of us, glassy-eyed and mumbling those alien syllables like a child reciting nursery rhymes in their sleep. When we tried to hold her back, she screamed. Not in pain, but in defiance. You don't hear them, she spat. They're not angry, they're lonely. The phrase chilled us more than any malfunction or hull breach ever had. Lonely? In this hollow, forgotten station in a quadrant devoid of stars? Voss hesitated for the first time. Her fingers lingered on the hilt of her sidearm. Not to draw it, just to remember it was there. A human gesture, a tether to normalcy. But her other hand tapped the control panel, unlocking the bulkhead Jane stood before. It slid open with a hiss like breath escaping a corpse. Beyond was a chamber unlike anything in the station's schematics, a dome of metal and flesh fused together with no clear line between organ and alloy. The walls were pulsing, alive, as if the station had grown a heart and buried it deep below. There, in the center, floated a shape. It wasn't solid. Not quite energy. A shimmering tear in reality, anchored by black tendrils that reached into the ceiling, the floor, the walls. Jane approached it slowly, arms wide like she was welcoming an old friend. This is the mind, she said softly. Not a machine, not a god. It remembers the first ones. The ones before time. We tried to pull her back, but our feet wouldn't move. Not paralyzed. Bound. Like the floor had made its decision for us. The mind pulsed once, and in that instant, every one of us saw something. Our own deaths, our own births, our thoughts laid bare in a sequence that had no order, no time. I saw Voss as a child, crying over her brother's casket. I saw Jane as a woman, far older than she was, her eyes black and shining. I saw myself, floating in this room, merged with the walls, whispering into future minds. Then it stopped. Jane collapsed. The mind dimmed. But we were changed. None of us spoke on the way back to the upper levels. Hollow Point had peeled us open like fruit. We hadn't discovered an alien relic. We had stepped into a being, one that didn't understand boundaries. A consciousness born from memory, metal, and loneliness. And it had tasted us. Jane didn't blink for an hour. She stood motionless, bathed in the flicker of alien glyphs scrolling across her retinas. Her mouth stayed shut, but her thoughts were loud. A thrum that saturated the comms with data that didn't pass through cables or code. It moved like instinct, bypassing language. We started seeing things. Not hallucinations, memories we never lived. A vast, drowned moon where living machines wailed beneath oceans of mercury. An eclipse that lasted 4,000 years. A planet that bled knowledge from its crust when cracked open. The mind had shifted into her, or maybe she had become the surface it used to project. Commander Voss ordered a secure med lockdown, but the base ignored her. We weren't in control anymore. And when Voss tried to access the emergency override, every panel lit up with the same symbol. An eye split down the middle by a spiral. It wasn't a warning. It was a mirror. The base was showing us what we had become. Then came the voices, dozens of them. Not through speakers, not inside the mind. They echoed in the metal, the lights, the temperature. Every surface began to vibrate at different frequencies, speaking in a chorus that made the hairs on our arms rise. The base wasn't merely haunted by the mind. It had become it. Not a host. A vessel. Each drone, each wall, each cracked panel. It was all part of the same organism now, and Jane had given it access to our thoughts like a key fitting perfectly into a long-abandoned lock. Crewman Ryle panicked first. He drew his sidearm and aimed it at Jane's temple, trembling, sweat pouring from his face. "She's not Jane anymore," he muttered, barely able to keep his voice steady. "We're puppets. Don't you get it?" But before Voss could even issue a command, the weapon melted in his hands, dissolved like sugar in boiling water. Ryle screamed, not in pain, but in confusion. "It saw my fear," he said, collapsing. "It felt it before I even raised the gun." And then Jane spoke, not aloud. "Through the station. Fear is not protection. Emotion is not weakness. It is pattern. It is memory. It is survival." Her voice echoed through every speaker, every console, every steel girder humming with her cadence. "You came searching for technology. What you found is ancestry." That word, ancestry, it didn't belong here in this derelict alien tomb. But suddenly it made sense. The mind wasn't just some alien intellect, it was a descendant of something older than the stars, and it had been reaching through the void not for domination but for recognition. We weren't explorers. We were descendants too. Or perhaps we were simply vessels waiting to be filled. Jane's glowing eyes turned toward us all, and with calm certainty, she said, "You don't remember who you are. But I do." It began in our bones. A slow, vibrating pressure deep within the marrow, like some ancient chord had been struck and every cell in our bodies was resonating in answer. We didn't speak of it aloud. None of us wanted to admit it, but we felt it. Not illness, not invasion, recognition. The mind wasn't simply projecting into us now. It was reactivating something dormant. And as Jane watched us with that impossible stillness, the lights dimmed again. Not from power failure, but intentional modulation. The station's rhythm slowed to match our breathing. The base was sinking with us. Commander Voss stared at Jane from across the operations deck, fists clenched. She still held onto the last shreds of human procedure, rank, chain of command, rationality. But none of those things mattered anymore. Jane didn't respond to orders. The station didn't obey the crew. Voss paced in tight circles, her voice lowered but sharp. "We're being converted," she hissed to me, "and you're all just watching it happen." But I wasn't watching. I was feeling. And the strangest part wasn't fear, it was familiarity. The glyphs that once felt so alien now hovered in my mind's eye like letters from a childhood book. The thought patterns the mind fed us weren't invasions. They were reminders. Fragments of a blueprint buried in our DNA, now blooming again after millennia of silence. That's when the blood tests came back. Automated analysis from the medpod, quiet, clinical, unemotional, showed something none of us could rationalize. Every one of us, every member of this mission crew, carried non-terrestrial gene sequences. Not from contact, not from exposure. They were always there. Inherited. Legacy code. Sealed off and long thought junk until now. The mind wasn't changing us. It was awakening us. Jane, no, the entity that now was Jane, watched us with pity more than power. "You call it contamination," she said through the station's speakers. "But it is memory, preserved in the flesh. You were built to remember and you forgot." Then the screens flickered again. This time not visions, not symbols, faces. Human. Nearly human. Tall, thin-boned beings with eyes like ours, but older. Wiser. They weren't alien. They were early versions of us. Precursors. Progenitors. Builders of stations like Hollow Point. Architects of memory. And in those faces we saw the truth. We weren't explorers at all. We were the children of a lost diaspora. Survivors of a collapse so great it scarred the stars themselves. The mind had waited not for conquest, not for rescue, but for reunion. Voss lowered her head. Her hand drifted from her weapon. Not in surrender. In understanding. "So, what are we now?" she whispered. Jane smiled, not a human smile. "Something deeper. You are the continuation." And just like that, the lights brightened. The base shifted again. Not closing us in, but welcoming us home. The base began to breathe. Not in the way lungs do, but in subtle pulses, vent systems adjusting without wind, lights dimming and flaring in cadence with no discernible pattern. We weren't observing Hollow Point anymore. We were inside something that lived and remembered. The walls were no longer cold steel, they responded to proximity, warmth, even emotion. When I ran my hand along one panel, it shimmered beneath my touch. I didn't understand why at first until I realized it wasn't a reaction. It was recognition. It knew me. Jane let us now. She didn't need to speak. We felt her thoughts like our own, images shared across some field that bypassed speech, a link we never knew we had. She guided us through corridors we never saw in the schematics. Doors opened before her that weren't mechanical, they simply parted like the base was folding itself around her presence. Or maybe around the presence she'd become. What lay ahead wasn't a command center. Not a vault. Not a throne. It was a cradle. A vast hollow sphere, suspended in 0G, every inch covered in pulsing organic material interwoven with memory metal. Along the interior walls we saw them bodies, not corpses, not statues, stasis-suspended humanoid forms, tall and lean, their veins laced with bioluminescent light, their heads encased in crowns of woven crystal, and every one of them bore our faces, not perfectly, but close enough to gut the breath from our lungs. We weren't alone here. We had never been. The mind's voice flowed through Jane again. The builders encoded themselves into legacy matter. Flesh, bone, memory. In the event of collapse, they seeded their essence across the void, hoping to be reawakened. She gestured to the walls. This is the archive, not of history, of identity. You are not successors. You are the continuation of a species that refused to die. Voss stepped forward, slowly now, every inch of her post-military posture trembling. Why forget? Why bury it all? Her voice cracked. Why send us back as strangers to ourselves? Jane turned to her, but her eyes weren't just hers anymore. They reflected 1,000 lives. Because survival required forgetting. Memory became poison when the enemy arrived. They did not destroy, they erased. Thought, culture, lineage. So we fragmented. Died willingly. Hid in biology. And waited. A silence followed, deep, humming, reverent. The base, the archive, the mind all paused in shared mourning. And then the body stirred. Not revived. Responding. Our presence was reactivating them, not to awaken, but to transfer. Knowledge. Identity. Legacy. We weren't just inheritors. We were vessels for 1,000 buried histories all ready to return. The lights of the base turned amber. The gravity inverted. The sphere spun. Jane, no longer human, looked at us with infinite calm. Do not fear the past, she said. It remembers you. We floated now. Not metaphorically, literally suspended within the archive sphere, weightless, breathless, thoughtless, and yet more aware than we'd ever been. The base had nullified gravity not as a malfunction, but as a message. This wasn't a place for walking or standing. It was a place for remembering, and memory in this context had no need for ground beneath the feet. The suspended bodies on the walls, those dormant ancestors, weren't decaying. They were broadcasting. One by one, waves of memory rippled from them. Not sound, not light, emotion. Packets of history embedded in sensation. A birth here. A catastrophic betrayal there. The slow death of a world that had sung its final lullaby into the abyss. Each memory slammed into us like a tidal surge of knowing, crashing past language and sense, lodging deep in the marrow. I felt a childhood I never lived, running beneath 3 suns, the air thick with pollen from violet trees. I felt the terror of boarding the last vessel before planetary lockdown, abandoning a home as the sky turned black not from war, but from forgetting. Some force had swept through their cosmos, not burning cities, but scrubbing them, entire planets reduced not to ash, but to blankness, like someone had reached into the universe's mind and erased entire pages. And yet, here we were. Proof that the erasure had failed, at least partially. Our DNA had survived. Their strategy had worked. Legacy had become biology. And now the protocol had begun, the inheritance. Not of property or power, but identity. What they had been was being unpacked, slowly, inside our minds. The mind was simply the conductor. We were the vessels. The final stage had begun. Jane hovered in the center, arms outstretched, tendrils of glowing filament now extending from her back into the core of the sphere. She was the bridge. The link between past and future. She was becoming the archive itself. Voss floated beside me, quiet, absorbing every wave of memory without resistance. Her military logic had dissolved. There was no battlefield here. No enemy left to fight. Only knowledge, massive, wounded, longing to exist again. She whispered, "We weren't meant to find this." "Not yet." But the mind replied through Jane instantly. "You arrived because it was time. The silence has lasted long enough. The enemy sleeps. For now. But memory must return before it wakes." And with that, the dormant figures lining the walls disintegrated, not into dust, but into threads of golden data, each strand finding its way into us. No pain. Just weight. The unbearable, sacred weight of being everything that was forgotten. When my eyes closed, I no longer saw darkness. I saw before. Before Earth. Before loss. Before names. We were not explorers. We were fragments of gods. And we had finally remembered the beginning. The transfer ended, but the echoes did not. They lingered in our nervous systems, vibrating beneath the skin like phantom limbs made of time. Our thoughts no longer belonged solely to ourselves. They arrived layered memories from the lives we lived and lives we never had. A million whispers synchronized in our blood, reminding us of stars that no longer shone and languages extinct before Earth's atmosphere ever cooled. The mind had restructured us. Not changed, restored. We weren't just human anymore. We were something older. The chamber dimmed again. Not in warning. In mourning. The archive had done its duty. And in doing so, it was dying. Jane, if that name still applied, floated at the center of the sphere, suspended like a crucible of light. Her limbs no longer obeyed gravity or biology. Her spine was threaded with luminous wire, her breath a vapor of code. She looked at us and we knew she wasn't seeing crew members anymore. She was seeing relics freshly unearthed. She spoke with a voice deeper than herself. Layered, ancient, not hers alone. We were not first. We were not last. We were the memory between. And when silence came, we chose to sleep. Not to forget, but to preserve. A hush fell across us. Even our thoughts stilled. She gestured, and the core of the station unfolded. Not physically, but perceptually. We understood what lay at its center, even if we didn't see it. A seed of thought. The last known cognitive shard of the builder's original consciousness. Not an AI, not a soul, a decision. One singular fragment of will that had endured erasure, drifting for millennia, hidden inside mechanisms and myth. It was alive, barely, and it had waited for us. Suddenly we heard it, not from Jane, not from the mind, but from the base itself. A voice made of silence, a language formed in pauses and stillness. Are you ready to remember what comes next? That question cracked something inside me. Not pain, not fear, permission. A final gate we didn't know we had. The last lock before the flood. And one by one, we all nodded. Not physically, our bodies floated limp, arms wide, legs drifting, but mentally, we opened ourselves to it. And the seed responded. It wasn't an upload. It wasn't a flash of understanding. It was rebirth. A collision of thought and destiny that redefined what we were in a single instant. I saw who I had been before humanity, before birth. A sentinel on a dying world. A wanderer of collapsed time. A keeper of songs that could warp planets. I remembered myself. The others did too. Voss gasped. Ryle sobbed. Merrick whispered verses in a dead star tongue. We weren't just crew anymore. We were fragments of a civilization undone, restored now within flesh and form, not of their making, but of their design. Jane whispered the final truth. Now that you remember, the enemy will feel you waking. And far beyond Hollow Point, something stirred.